Hello and welcome to this video, and this video is going to be called Identity, Politics and Music. And for some of you seeing that title, you'll probably be rubbing your hands together thinking, oh, Andy's going to stir the pot again and get all the lefties wound up with this video. And of course the lefties will all be groaning and go, oh no, not this. I like Andy when he chats about music. I wish he wouldn't get involved in politics. He doesn't know about that stuff. You'll start to get the standard pushback, that I'm ignorant of the subject, that I shouldn't be allowed to be speaking on the subject or whatever, which I find very annoying. So this video actually didn't start out like this. I came up with the idea last night, and I wanted to do a video that had a much more clickbait title, which is this the greatest piece of art in the 20th century or in modern culture or something like this? Basically, I was going to try and stake my claim on what I thought was the most important single piece of art, music, film, books, whatever. Was it 1984? Which one is it? Is it like, Freewheeling by Bob Dylan? These are the ones that start to pop into my mind, and I may still call this video this. In fact, I might put the video up twice with the two titles and see which one does best, just to get on everybody's nerves, because that's the sort of thing you should never do on YouTube. And that's the point here, is that when I set this YouTube up, I thought, I'm going to talk about music, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to give my opinion about music, and I'm going to say I love something, and by the same token, I'm going to say I hate something. And if I give my sort of political opinions, which are going to come in, or my cultural opinions, or my opinions on history, or any opinion that I've got, which are only my opinions, right? I start from the standpoint that an opinion is just an opinion. My opinions could be wrong, and I welcome pushback, proper pushback, not just name calling and saying I'm ignorant, proper pushback, saying I don't think you're right there, because I will adjust my opinion based upon that. And I think that's the thing. These are just my opinions. I stake my claim, and then people can push back, and I welcome it. I really do welcome that. As long as it's done in a friendly way. There's no point in getting angry with someone because they've got a different opinion to you. That's like you're straying into sort of totalitarian, a totalitarian place by doing that. So it is a lot of a big preamble for me just to be able to tell you what I think is the greatest piece of art, music, whatever you want, creative works in the 20th century. What is it? That's what you all want to know. And so I actually came up with this idea last night, actually. I started to think about it, and I'm going through all the possibilities. Is it Marcel Duchamp's, fountain, it's called, the urinal, upside down urinal? It could be that. That's pretty important. What about Stravinsky's Rites of Spring? I thought this was an interesting way of thinking. And then it came to me what was obviously the greatest piece of creative work in the 20th century is The Jazz Singer, which was a film made in 1927, I think came out in 1928, and is the first sound film. But of course, as soon as we look at The Jazz Singer, that film seems to personify so many elements that are all at play that basically create 20th century Western culture. It's all there, right? Film's there, sound film is there, musicals, first musical ever, the idea of jazz in mainstream culture and the way jazz worked in 1927, at the point where jazz, 1927 is the year that Louis Armstrong was making his Hot Five. So we're right at the beginning of the idea of what jazz is and how that's going to inform swing music, the idea of the film star, the idea of the music star, the idea of the vaudeville entertainer. And Al Jolson represents all of those, all in one go, right? He is all of those, and he's the biggest artist of the first part of the 20th century, and a truly great artist as that. He had a Jewish background, but he was very influenced by jazz and experienced jazz right at its birth. And he was one of the first mainstream entertainers to take that in. Al Jolson's approach is as important as Louis Armstrong's approach. He is the forerunner of your Frank Sinatras and your Bing Crosbys, but he's also the first proper talking film star. And also he brings the Jewish tradition into American entertainment, which is there in its comedy, it's there in vaudeville, it's there in its musicals, right? So I was sat there going, my God, this film's mind-blowing. This film's mind-blowing. There's so much to talk about. I might have to do 3 videos just to get into what this is, but I was very aware that as soon as I start to talk about it, there's one dominant aspect of it, which is also very interesting, which would make it difficult, and I would have to either ignore it or deal with it head on. And that is the idea of identity and our modern lens of identity politics, which we now look at that film. And the overarching important thing about that film is, of course, that Al Johnson is performing in blackface. And that blackface minstrel entertainment is being linked to jazz in a way which is very troublesome, and I can see it's very troublesome. And then on top of that, the film poster and the iconic imagery that comes from this film. I mean, if I did an encyclopedia of film and I put the poster of the jazz singer up, which of course is the white hands and then the mouth and the white eyes of the blackface makeup, which is so iconic that when I was growing up in the 70s, people would quite happily have on their wall. It was so iconic. And this is no longer iconic. It's been shoved away. It's a taboo now. And so the thing that's incredible about the jazz singer in embodying all the things that represent, our Western culture that has made billions and billions of pounds and created the cultural framework which we live, including part of the civil rights movement, it's part of this identitarian view of the world. This film is like exposes that as well, weirdly. Another thing that was apparent to me is that it's a statement of Jewishness, American Jewishness as well. I mean, the storyline is about this guy, and he grows up in in a Jewish community, and he's a follower of the Jewish religion, and he has, what are they called? He's like a cantor, which these are the Jews that sort of sing songs and tell stories and stuff, but he discovers jazz, and it's the sort of, you can't go and do that, When it was remade with Neil Diamond in the 70s, it was still called The Jazz Singer, but the idea of jazz was really removed. That was taken out, which I find very troublesome, because actually, if you watch the Jolson story and Jolson Sings Again, which are 2 brilliant films, again, which no one will talk about, which came out in the late 40s, which are a celebration of Al Jolson's career. And I think it was Larry Parks was the guy that played him brilliantly. Al Jolson was involved. And you could see when you watch those films were very interesting for me to learn how jazz and also the fact that black musicians were playing jazz and the way that transmitted out into mainstream culture. I'm fascinated by this, right? And I feel this is so important. But the problem I've got is I can't come on here and talk about this piece of creative work, which I think is the most important thing in the 20th century, without walking into the mire of identity politics. You can't get round it. And what that suggests is that within our culture at the moment, there is an ideology. This is the overarching ideology that we have at the moment, which you have to get around. Everything goes through this lens, and we have had, same as in, say communist Russia, everything was seen through the lens of communism. In Nazi Germany, everything was put through the lens of Nazism. And I'm sure the left wing here will be shouting yes, and in the West we look through everything through the lens of Western capitalism, which I think we do. We do look at things through lenses. This is the whole point. So what I want to do is I want to try and discuss this film and take head on the idea of identity and try and show you how important identity actually is in terms of working out what makes music great, what makes art great, We need to know what makes these things great, because I do come at you with a bunch of ideologies and dogmas, in other words, my opinions. And one of my opinions is that we're going through a cultural shift at the moment. And the thing that will save us will be for us to redefine our relationship to creativity, which I do think Western capitalism has eroded. We have put through Western capitalism and materialism and science, we just put our faith in that. And we don't have much faith in creativity. And we can't, and the reason is because we can't value it. So if you were to go into any educational establishment and see that there's money being poured in, taxpayers' money to support people to become painters or musicians, the knee-jerk reaction will be, yeah, well, why are we training all these people? They're not going to get jobs in it, because the capitalist view of creativity is the only one that counts. Does that make sense? And I think the lefties will be going, yes, Andy's right there. I'm a bit troubled now with him saying that. I'm not too sure where he's coming from. Well, that is where I'm coming from. I am championing the value of creativity, and I believe it actually holds the key to how we move into this new cultural framework, which has been created by the change of technology and political shifts, the whole thing that we know, the chaos that we're in at the moment. The only way through that is to be able to judge that from a quality point of view, and science cannot judge quality. I don't care. I've had the discussion with other people about this, and of course, this is my opinion. I see myself as being political. I see myself as coming on here and putting certain ideas forth, and I hope these ideas, land, right? So this is where we're at. So why go back to the jazz singer? It's because in the 1920s, the culture was going through a huge shift. That's why we started the 1920s, the back end of the 1910s. The First World War's happened. The First World War's been a shock to what was basically a sort of Victorian worldview, Victorian Edwardian worldview. And we know, if we go back to those little black and white films that were made in the 1910s or the 1900s, and we see them flickering away, and maybe computers have come along and made them all look posh so we can see what they look like if we were actually there. We know we're looking at a different time. We're looking at a Victorian time. There's horses going up and down the roads with carriages. Everyone's dressed in clothes that nobody would ever dress in now. There's everyone seems to be very shallow in a way, because they really believe in their culture. They're going to fight, and when we go to war with the Germans in the First World War, people sign up. Kids who were 15 lie about their ages, and they sign up to this war, and they go out there. When they get there, they realise something, and it makes them question what they're fighting for. If you think of the war poets, why are these kids dying? For England? For what? You see what I mean? And I think you come out of that, you go into the 1920s, and there is a shift in culture which corresponds with the sort of Henry Ford industrialization and commodification at that point in time. So we go into what I call the modernist period. Now, modernism goes back before then. The art's in its modernist period at the end of the 19th century. But the point is here, I look at it and see a cultural shift, and we suddenly go from that sort of Edwardian view of the world to this sort of 1920s, the jazz age, and suddenly we've got aeroplanes and trains and fast cars, and the futurists in Italy are being all, fascistic and aesthetically powerful, driving around in their fast cars and doing paintings like that. And girls are suddenly wearing little skirts, and they got little black bobs, and they no longer look like the Edwardian era. Now on the back of airplanes, the airplanes are looping the loop, and they're doing high kicks on the back of it. And this is being backed up by music made by black people, which is all chaos, and it grooves, and it's got a beat, and people dance to it. When they dance to it, they're up close, which means they might become sexually aroused with each other, and people might actually have to admit that, human beings have sex. All this stuff emerges in the jazz age, okay? And the great dominant art form, which is becoming the dominant art form at that time, is cinema. Cinema's a novelty. In 1903, when they make the great train robbery, cinema's a novelty. But when they make that film and it's about a robbery, okay, and when you watch that film in 1903, and at the end, that guy, the bandit, actually turns around and points his gun at the audience, at that point, that is like modernism. That is the 20th century emerging, and films just come in and take over. Before long, they're going to be more important than books and poetry and painting and all that boring stuff that the poshies like. Will be moved over for the poshies to appreciate. The poshies will be able to now say, we're posh because we like this stuff. Of course, in the 19th century here in the UK, everyone was painting massively fat square cows, you know. And the reason is because that was the popular art form at the time. All the people who were in farms, and they were like, oh, I like a big cow, I do. Oh, I love to see a big cow. Oh, have you seen Joe's got a massive cow. He's almost square, he's so massive. Well, you want to bloody see that? I went up the art gallery the other day. It was bloody cute to see a painting. And it was a beautiful cow, a beautiful square cow it was. I was most impressed by it. Right? My accent shifted a little bit. I don't know, I was going towards pirate, so I've got out of that. So, this is definitely the case that painting loses its grasp, you know, and then it goes up its own arse, doesn't it? Everyone's doing abstract painting and the general public hate it and all that type of stuff because they're watching films. They're going to see Rudolph Valentino, and when he dies, people are so bought into this art form, people are killing themselves because that's 1926. And then the magic piece drops in with cinema and they make them talking pictures. And that must have been a shock. To have shadows on the wall, to have this view out into the world. It's a little bit like the gun being pointed at the audience. For Al Jolson to stand up and sing and that voice to come out and actually see it coming out, and there's a psychological effect that we're not aware of, is that you're seeing my mouth move, but the sound you're hearing is coming from a different place altogether. But psychologically, you put this together, don't you? You put all that together, and that must have been like magic because this black and white shadow not only spoke, but it sung, it made music, and it sang in a style which wasn't operatic popular music. It was music based upon American cultural music forms, not just jazz, but also folk music, Jewish music. And when this film went around the world, for many people, and Al Jolson started to sing, think about it. If you're watching that in the UK, you're going, what's he singing? Why does he sound like that? Why is he in blackface? What's that about? What is going on? I've never heard anything like this. And of course, Al Jolson was loved. So people went, oh my God, this is amazing. Right? And it's the point in which it happens, right? This is the thing. So we're in this cultural shift in the 1920s. The next time that happened, that was in the 1960s. And the music that we talk about on this channel, and this is why this is so important, the music that we talk about is the product of that shift in the 1960s, right? We also refer back to the jazz and sometimes the blues. I don't do enough of them on blues, but and country music, you know, and I will try and do more as I get into this because I am discovering all those forms now. This channel is making me get interested in bloody country music. I can't believe it. Anyway, that's by the by. Right, so you've had the 1920s shift, you've had the 1960s shift, and we're at the back end. We're at the back end of the shift. The shift started around about 2000 and, I don't know, 15, I think, I would say, when it started to happen. By the time we get to 2020, for neatness sake, let's make 2020 the same as 1920. Right, so we're in 1925 at the moment. So Louis Armstrong, or the equivalent now, has not started. Is just starting to do the hot fives, and the art form that is going to pull everything together is still 3 years down the line. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but it's an interesting thought process, isn't it? So what's the ideology that we're overturning at the moment? What's the ideology that's going to be overturned? What's the equivalent of sort of the Victorian dogma that drove people to go into the Second World War that then got questioned? What is that ideology, do you think, that we've had for the last 50, 60 years? What was the ideology that underpinned the sort of 1960s revolution, right? And what this is the politics of identity. Now, I am going to now stake my colours to the mast. Is that the right saying? And I'm going to tell you my opinion about identity politics now, because as well as me thinking through about talking about the jazz singer and why it's so important, and the very fact that this video is happening is why it's so important. That's what you've got to understand. This is the explanation of why that film is so important, and I'm going to keep referring back to it throughout. right? But the reason why The Jazz Singer is so important is because it's a film about identity. And it's a film about Al Jolson's identity being Jewish, but being challenged by American music, black music, as you wish. Now, everyone knows here that I am troubled by the term black music, and I'm going to try and explain not my reasons why I think jazz is not black music, but I'm actually going to explain here why I don't like that term, because it's basically a thing I don't like. And I'm going to start with this. So let's deal head on with identity. So identity is the same stem as the word identify, right? Or an ident. This is something that we use to tell what something else is, right? So if I was talking to someone about a mouse and they'd never heard this word before, they go, "What the hell's a mouse? What's a mouse?" So the little creatures about this big, they're furry, they got little ears, little twitchy nose, and they got little black eyes. And what colour are they? Well, they're usually grey, but they could be all sorts of colours, really. They got a little tail on them, and they run around. They live in your house. Where do they live? Oh, they got these little like things in your skirting boards, and they go in there. Oh, do they? Yeah, I saw one of those. Yeah, it was like this program on the TV I saw. It's like this cat called Tom, and there was this mouse called Jerry. Is that a mouse? Yeah, that's a mouse. Oh, so they can talk, can they? No, they can't talk, but this mouse was talking. Yeah, well, is that not a mouse then? Because you just said that, when you identify, a mouse can't talk. Yeah, well, that mouse can talk. Is he a mouse? Well, he is a mouse, but you said he wasn't. I'm getting really confused. And the other day, I was trying to use this computer, my friends, and they said, use the mouse. And I thought, oh, that's a mouse. But that was nothing like Jerry, or like the creature that you're saying scampers around your house trying to get in your Rice Krispies. I'm getting really confused. So this is a fundamental philosophical problem here, is that we have this idea of a mouse. That word identifies a mouse, but once you get into the weeds, it doesn't really identify a mouse. So how does it, what is a mouse? Now, what the Greeks did, what Plato said, was something that is absolutely bonkers to me. He said that a mouse has a mouse essence, and that essence is mouseness, right? It's the essence of a mouse, and the computer mouse, and Mickey Mouse, and Jerry Mouse, and the mouse that tries to get your Rice Krispies all refer to this platonic mouse, which embodies mouseness. So this identity has an essence. Now, things do have an essence, don't they? I think, but this is heavy philosophy. And when you get into philosophy, these things are discussed ad nauseum, to use is that a philosophical? Well, that's a Derek and Clive album, isn't it? See, that's the point, and there it just happened there. To make sense of the world, we have to use words. For words to make sense, they have to point to things. That's what an identity is. An object's idents, the things that we identify by, is an identity. So, I went to the dentist yesterday. They give you a form and you have to fill it out. So, what's your name? That's an identity. I'm an Andrew. And I'm part of the great big group of Andrews around the world. If there's any Andrews watching, you've got to stick together. Us Andrews got to stick. I'm also an Edwards. So if there's any Edwards out there, I want to, and if there's any Andy Edwards or Andrew Edwards, we should all get together, because we identify by all being called Andrew Edwardses or Andy Edwards. There's a whole host of them. There's some bloke who used to play football for Southend United. I come across him all the time. And I know exactly who he is, because I've got the same name, and I would love to meet him and say, you're called Andy Edwards like me, and I hope he knows who I am, because if he doesn't know who I am, I'm going to be annoyed, because I know who he is. I always wonder if he knows who I am. If I ever do get in contact, I'm going to bring him on the channel and get to find out what music he likes. I don't care what he could like Lighthouse Family, as far as I'm concerned, because I will identify with him, because he's called Andy Edwards. You get what I mean? I was born in 1968, right? I used to have black hair, now it's great. I've got green eyes. These are my identifiers, all the things you write down. And on modern forms, it will have nationality. And in the old days, I would have put British. But now I can say that I am mixed race British. And there's one I can tick exactly. Because my mom's identity is different to mine. Because my mom was born in what was called Calcutta in 1940. and she's Indian. She's actually half Indian. I'm a quarter Indian, and she was brought up in India, and she has that identity, which is slightly different to mine. She's an immigrant into the country. She came in as an immigrant. I'm not an immigrant. I was born here. Right, so these are all the things that you identify people by. But there's much shallower things like skin color and stuff like this. So this is something that's is essential, is that we identify people by these things, and these things we identify each other by they're all varied. You see, they're all varied because they all have a level of subjectivity to them, okay? But some of them are more objective than others, you know. So if you identify yourself as being, I don't know, creative, that's a lot more airy-fairy than identifying yourself as being 6 foot tall, which is an actual thing you are, okay? But of course, nobody's exactly 6 foot tall. Can you see, I'm really getting into the weeds to show you what the weeds are. Now, that we need to do this as a society, we identify people like this. This is really the case. But I have a sort of Kantian moral position that I'm willing to question. But my moral position that I stick to, because I think it's really, really important and kind and fair and nice. This is the whole point, because I get the idea when I say these things that people think I'm not being nice. My Kantian position morally about people is, although we have these identity, I'll really look at you while I'm saying this so I can really get this across. Although we have these identity characteristics, there's millions of them, right? But none of them should be used to make a judgment about an individual, right? We might have prejudice about all these identity characteristics, right? We might do. We might think that all drummers are nutters, for example, and they're crazy, and they're like Keith Moon was a nutter, and that's about it, really. But from that basis, we will assume they're all nuts, they're always breaking stuff. And so, you know, or they're a bit stupid. You know, when I was in bands, there was this idea that drummers were a bit stupid. There's lots of jokes about drummers, you know. How do you know when the drum riser is horizontal? It's because the dribble comes out of both corners of the drummer's mouth. It's those types of things, which I find very funny. I like a drummer joke as much as anybody, right? But it would be wrong to go, you're a drummer, so you must be thick and you must like breaking stuff. And I'm not shifting from that opinion about you. That's wrong. That is utterly wrong. Okay? Now, we then get into history. History, because of a lot of idiot people that tend to do this, and because we didn't really structurally have a philosophical system, probably to the Enlightenment, where we could start to question this, his identity has then had, like what we call these stereotypes, or whatever you want to call it, has been embodied deep into our culture. Going back to the idiot that is Plato, with his Platonic theories of inbuilt essence, you know, he also wrote a book called The Republic, and he said that there was classifications of people. There was like a hierarchy of people, a little bit like the caste system in India that was apparent when my mum was born, and she told me all about this caste system and how her mother, who was English, you know, used to get told off for, you know, being friendly with the untouchables. A caste system, right? Or disgusting, right? And Plato argued there was a slave class. So from a capitalist point of view, when us British wanted to make some money, you know, getting people picking cotton and growing all other things down in the Americas, we went to Africa because it was the biggest slave trading place in the world, and we could get people that were specifically skilled at doing that, take them across, and they could be our slaves. But the trouble is, they had like brown skin because they were from Africa. And so rather than going, we can't enslave people, it's wrong. We wouldn't enslave British people. Well, they did, because they would send, but they were punishments for crimes. These people haven't committed any crimes. It's absolutely, we're just grabbing them, right? So it's very easy to make a jump there. And this is the evil of human beings, is to make this jump. Well, we know Plato's slave class. These people we're buying to go to America, they're probably, because their brown skin is probably, an example of their slave. They are slave. They are of the slave class, obviously. And let's build up a big folklore around that, which justifies them being there. And then we get into a wrangle where certain people go, no, I think the brown people are the same as us. And they go, oh, I don't think they are at all. That's the stain of racism. That's the stain that's on America. That's the stain that's on American history. And that history is embodied in there. Now, when I say I don't think jazz is black music, the reason why people get upset is they go, black people in America played a part for hundreds of years. They were involved in it. So they brought a very specific culture, which was absolutely wonderful to America. It wasn't valued, but it's actually evidence in all the creative work that's come out of America, not just jazz and blues, but also country music. They're in there all the way through, and you are not giving them credit by denying them. That's black American music, and it's of that culture. And when you stand up and deny it like you are, Andy, you are denying that history. My point goes back to my basic moral position, is that nobody should be judged because they belong to a certain characteristic. And so I have the problem, and believe me, I'm not a dogmatic ideologist, so I know what the pushback is against this, and I know how I would counter myself on this. Nobody tends to do that because they're too warped by their sort of the ideology of identity, so they just push back a bit, almost like they're like the Spanish Inquisition, you know, that, oh, you're bad for even questioning this. That's the point, you see. But if we take any musician, whether it be white or black, and try and judge them based upon their skin colour, for me, we are in dodgy territory, straight off. Now, as much as there's the history, which is very, very complex in America, that history does play a part in all the wonderful art forms that we love. Minstrelsy, slavery, segregation played a huge part in the creation of jazz, blues, country music, and, as I am saying, even cinema, right? Even cinema. When cinema was ruling the world in the 1920s, 30s and 40s and 50s, the big films were musicals, right? The big films were westerns that dealt with that American culture in a mythic way. And if you think, when I grew up, if you just said, what's the greatest film of all time, people would have said Gone with the Wind, which has a pretty awful, you know, sort of sunshiny view of the South and slavery in that film. That was the myth that was created around it. That is embodied in some of Louis Armstrong's songs like Sleepy Time Down South. This is what you're dealing with. And you see, I'm interested in all this, and I don't want it covered up by anybody. I want to know about it. I want to know what created jazz. I want to know the good bits and the bad bits, and I want to be able to wait and be able to tease out what is the good moral aspects of this music. And to me, through all this horrific racism, all the prejudice, which I've tried to explain why that is and how it works, to me, the wonderful thing is that despite that, human beings still got together and shared their different cultural identities and shared their own personal experiences and shared the common humanity that we all had and created jazz. Did black people play a part in creating jazz? Yes, overwhelmingly the greatest part, okay? But never was jazz created by black people in America. And I've said this over and over again to the pushback to people against me. Name the people. Oh, Buddy Bolden. Well, what band was he in before he was in the Buddy Bolden band? I'll tell you what band he was in. He was in another jazz group because he jumped from one jazz group to form his own band. And before then, there was a whole ton of loads of jazz groups. And then people say, but they weren't jazz groups, Andy. Why? Because Buddy Bolden invented jazz. I'm like, going, what are you on? You see, we don't know what Buddy Bolden sounds like. We don't know what anybody sounds like. We don't know what any jazz group sounded like until 1917, when I'm afraid a white band recorded it. And then once that was recorded, it completely altered jazz because of capitalism. That people were like going, what's selling? what the original Dixieland Jazz Band did. Well, shall we do something like that? And everybody, King Oliver, Jelly Roll Morton, Fletcher Henderson, all of them at that point, whatever they were doing, and we don't know what they were doing before, we have no idea, they changed. This is the history of, this is the key bit. It's all happening in the 1920s. And within a few years, Hollywood is completely changing the dominant art form of the whole world based upon jazz. What the hell's going on? And we can't talk about it. And I tell you why we can't talk about it, because of the blackface. The blackface, because that is highly racist. And the reason it is racist, it comes from minstrelsy. But minstrelsy is the backbone of all American cultural forms. It's in everything. It's not just in music. It's not just in Hollywood musicals. It's also in film. It's in the whole lot. And I need to be able to talk about it without these ideologues standing over me saying, you cannot talk about it. You should not be talking about this. It needs to be brushed away. So I'll give you the dilemma I've got. Once I've got this video done, if I was to do what I wanted to do and go, is this the greatest creative work of the 20th century, question mark, then what do I put on? The obvious thing would be to put on the poster that went with the jazz singer. It's iconic. But can I put it up there? Am I allowed to show a blackface on YouTube? You know, because this simplistic, dumb ideology will go that if I do, that means I support that in some way. Don't get to the disdain yet, Andy. You're not there. Hold it back. So what's gone wrong? I've made my statement. Don't like racism. What is racism? It's when you judge somebody on an identity characteristic. But I think what's happened is there was so much. When the jazz singer was made, if you think about it, these musicians, the important musicians in the history of jazz are black musicians. Although that isn't accurate. If I was to go Sidney Bechet, King Oliver, Freddie Keppard, Jelly Roll Morton, Louis Armstrong, if we look at that lineage, some of those are Creole musicians. And Creole musicians, let us say, are sort of half white, half black, if you want to look at it from modern. You can't look at it from a modern point. Creole people are not black people. It's a different thing. I would rather scrub it and go inhabitants in New Orleans. I'm quite happy to talk about Creole culture. I'm quite happy to talk about Afro-American culture. I'm quite happy to talk about white culture. But the point is all those forms in New Orleans at that time are integrated into this thing called jazz. And that actually doesn't matter. The reason it's important is because when someone finally bothered to record it, it blew up. And it blew up because there was a cultural shift happening in the 1920s, and jazz represented that shift. And what it represented was the voice of American people. It's not black people, it's American people. It's the mix of American people. And Jewish immigrants who had come to America had a similar experience. They're not the slavery there. I'm not saying it's equatable to the suffering. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that America was the summation of all these cultures coming together. Italian culture, that's in jazz. Spanish culture, that's in jazz. French culture, that's in jazz. Jewish culture, they're all in there somewhere. And the jazz singer is important because it's about that. And that film was so important that it changes cinema forever, which means it changes storytelling, it changes television, it changes the whole thing. Everything that culturally we are in the West, everything that represents where we are now, everything that's under question, everything that's been pulled apart or fallen together, the idea that cinema, the film industry is dying, the music industry is dying, the celebrities are dying off, all of it's falling apart. Everything that is the cultural aspects of our Western culture is falling apart at the moment. It's falling apart. And it's all embodied in this film. But you cannot examine this film properly because of this ideology. Now, where does this ideology come from? What is going on? Okay, so let's go right back. Let's assume that, there's all these identity groups, but they're all arbitrary. We're not going to judge an individual based upon their identity groups, right? But that's not the only ideology that's to work here in the 20th century. There's other ideologies that are anti-liberal ideologies. They're different ideologies. They're not terrible. But there is what I call a sort of utopian death cult ideology, right? So when the Enlightenment happens, what we've got going on there is a push against religion. Science is suddenly emerging, saying, I don't know whether the Earth's the centre of the universe, and I don't know whether human beings are different to the animals really, and it's like, when we look at it, we can sort of predict what's going to happen through science. The science sort of gives us the mechanisms of how things happen, and then, a bit later on, when Darwin comes up with a theory of evolution, we don't really need God in any of this. And now Nietzsche says God is dead. So the Enlightenment is really a push against the ideology that was there, but that religious ideology is not based in like rational empirical thinking. It's based in something else. It's based in what I call a utopian death cult. You put your faith in Jesus Christ, Jesus will save you, and if you put your thinking with him, you will end up having an everlasting life in a utopia, perfect utopia. Everyone who doesn't follow the rules will then be destroyed. Is it like with the wheat and the chaff, or whatever happens? They'll be burnt in hell or whatever it is. So you better line up with our ideology. Every single ideology is like that. Put it really simply, it's a utopian death cult. We know how to make the world better. These are the rules. You must follow them. If you follow them, great, you will end up in the brilliant utopia. But if you don't follow them, damnation awaits. Well, who's going to snuff me out? Well, we will. Spanish Inquisition. What the Christians did to Native Americans. What the Protestants did to the Catholics here in the UK. What the Catholics did to the Protestants. I mean, it's like, that's how utopian death cults work. Now, when the Enlightenment happened, what do you do then if you're a utopian sort of revolutionary ideology? You have to come up with a material version of this. And this is called Marxism. This is Marx's great achievement, is to bring back the utopian death cult. So he stated, if you just let things go as they are, people will realise how bad capitalism is, and they will move towards this utopian communist state where there's no more jobs and you can choose what you want to be. Whatever you want to be, you just be it, and you'll put all your money in the big pot. There'll be no money. But to get there, it's going to be painful. But it will naturally happen. And then when we get to the 20th century, right around the time that we're talking about, right around the end of the First World War, you then have the Russian Revolution, and in Russia, they're trying to make this work. To make it work, because it hadn't happened, everyone else, all the communists want it to happen, it'll just naturally happen. It's not happening. And Lenin's great breakthrough is to go, these identity groups that this is all based around, because you have to have identity groups in a religion. You have to have the ones who are right and the ones who are wrong. It's always like that. The Philistines, you have to have those. And in Marxism, these essentialist identity groups, which have to be not questioned because they just exist and we're not allowed to question them, is the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. The proletariat are essentially good. If you put them in charge, it'll be fine, because they are different essentially to the bourgeoisie, who are all bad. We can't imagine a system where some of these bourgeoisie are good and bad. We judge the whole lot morally on the fact that they identify as the bourgeoisie, or we identify them as that. The proletariat are really good. So what Lenin said is, he goes, why don't we get we'll represent the proletariat. And some of the things we might have to do to the proletariat might be bad, but if we hold the utopian death cult up ahead and we aim for that, we will go through this pain, but it will pay off in the end. And of course, this ends in utter genocide, terrible, because the only thing you can do in that point is go, anybody who's not signed up to this way, what are we going to do with you? I don't know. You're going to have to be killed, because there's nothing else we can do with you, really. You either join the club or you get killed. That's the deal. It's a shame. It's they've done it to themselves. They've damned themselves. All they've got to do is get on with the obvious truth, which is our communist truth. This happens right across at that point fascism emerged, Nazism emerges, all at that point. In America, it doesn't, because America is based upon a different set of values that we should be valuing in the West. And I believe the jazz singer, with its Jewish, black, or the whole story that you're not defined by that identity group, that you can move across and all that stuff, it's very 1960s, the jazz singer is. That represents something else. And that's the thing that's pushing against all the Nazis and the fascists and the Stalinists, and they're off doing all their things. So the utopian types in the communist types in the West, they're like, oh, what should we need to change this? And if we look at it, it's much more about power than money. I mean, Marx was all about class. I don't think he is. It's much more about power and power relations. And these identity groups, it's not similar to bourgeoisie. And no, if you look at it, there's certain identity groups are being repressed now. If you think about it, the Nazis are doing this like 101. They've identified a group, the Jews. Now, it doesn't matter whether you are a cultural Jew or an actual religious Jew, or you're not even a cultural Jew. You're just what we could call a biological Jew. It doesn't really exist because none of this exists. But we're going to put them all in the same group. We are going to identify them as being they're the bad people, essentially. Right? They're the bad people, essentially. So, Hitler comes to he thinks he was doing moral good in helping humankind out by just obliterating them all. Right? Now, that is a terrible thing that happened, because it was a Western country with Western technology trying to wipe out what they saw as an identity group that was essentially bad, that there was a stain on Jewish people that need to be eradicated. What's going on at the moment is still that. What's going on in not only Israel, Gaza, but also in the Ukraine is this: it's identity politics. The whole thing's identity politics. I'm anti-identity politics for that reason. I believe what Hamas are doing. I believe what the Netanyahu government are doing. I believe what the Ukrainians are arguing over. I believe all that is about identity, and it's the crime of judging people on an individual level by their identity group. I think it's the worst thing human beings do, and we have to spot it at all times. So as the 20th century emerges, there's all sorts of philosophies coming in, and we get to this idea that there is a power hierarchy. It's like Marx, but it's not like Marx. This is why the identity types don't like being called Marxists. They hate it, because they're not Marxists. It's something much more complex. What they state is there are different identity groups, so there is a hierarchy of identity. You could be black, you could be disabled, you could be a woman, you could be gay, you could be trans. They are all the identity groups that through history and through sort of a cultural progression have ended up at the bottom of the pile being prejudiced against. Now, I will tell you right now, I agree with that. I think those general statements are true. Okay? I think that black people in America are prejudiced against. I think black people all over the world are prejudiced against. And the reason is because of the colour of their skin, right? But my problem is, my solution is a different solution. Please understand this. I have an opinion about this, and my solution is that we don't treat people individually on whatever identity trait we've got. We don't try and solve what the identity traits are. You just have legislation that does not look at these identity groups, right? I don't want to be judged on the fact that I identify as white, which I've been told, and I'm sat there, well, my mum's not white, you should be one white. But if you ask my mum, she would say she was white. I don't know, the whole thing falls apart as soon as I even try and get into the logic of these idiots, right? But anyway, let's try and get there. I'm trying to be as nice as I possibly can on this video. I'm really trying to put both sides across, but I find it infuriating, and that's something you're going to pick up on. I find this infuriating because I'm getting accused of being right-wing and racist when the place that I am talking from is me not liking racism. And why would you care about racism if you're white? Because I come from a mixed race family, so I have never had anyone being racist to me ever in my life. except for identitarian black people in America who have called me all sorts of things. But taking that out, I don't mind that, because I'm in the white higher privileged one, aren't I? You know, so I can't say anything. Look, don't be sarcastic. Keep on it, Andy. Right, let's try and get back on track with this. I'm getting annoyed by it. You're getting annoyed, aren't you? You shouldn't get annoyed, right? It shouldn't get annoyed. You need to put your argument across in a calm manner, right? It is annoying to be called a racist when you believe that you're not a racist. It's annoying to be called right-wing because what the left-wing believed 5 minutes ago, they no longer believe. I don't know. I'm having a rest here. So, this is a really difficult one to do. This one is. Let's try and reconvene here. So, the history of it. Let me try and explain what I think is the modern identity view of the world. You have a hierarchy of power. People belong to a group. If they belong to that group, which is phenomenological, nobody actually belongs to it. So the identitarians go, well, there's no such thing as race, but there's a cultural thing, and people identify. So we get to this idea of self-identifying. Once you get to self-identifying, it sort of breaks down the idea that we use this to identify others. So, you know, I might go, oh, you're black, aren't you? Because you look black to me. That's me identifying that person as black. They might turn around and go, well, I'm not actually black, I'm mixed race. Oh, well, that's still black, isn't it? Well, then this is the problem. This is where we get into this. But really hard to even get a solid ground that identity politics can even play devil's advocate, that it will have a solid, to me, that there's a logical, solid stance. But say we have these identity groups, arbitrary identity groups that don't actually exist and have no actual bounds, have an essential quality of underprivilegedness. So if you're black in America, it does not actually matter how wealthy you are, how privileged you are, what's happened in your individual life. You might have all these privilege points, but the fact you're black knocks you down. And that's true of every single black person. They're knocked down by their blackness. You know, they have the number of privilege points that they're knocked down. So it's like a black billionaire in America is in some way less privileged than Anne Frank, who was white as far as they're concerned. She, when she was carted off as a child to the concentration camps to be murdered, still has some privilege points above a black billionaire. That is the basic belief system. Now, I know the left who don't know anything about this and haven't thought it through, but feel that they are nice middle-class people by championing this, as shouting, say, that's not what it's about at all, Andy. What it's about is that just some people have been prejudiced against, so we're just trying to create a world where they get a bit of a leg up, they get a help up, right? So, okay, then let's help the black billionaire. No, we don't want to help the black billionaire. You have to help the black billionaire if your view of privilege and lack thereof comes from identity. Right, now, this is a problem in a capitalist society that we will get onto at the end of this video. All right? That is not what is going on. If you think it is and you are calling me ignorant, I'm afraid you are ignorant and you have not studied the philosophy. Go back and read your critical theorists. Go back and read Mao. Go back and read Marx and Stalin and read Foucault and Derrida. Read them all. Get a working knowledge of the academic framework that is underpinning this, because you don't understand what it is. You think it's about being nice, and you think by stating these things and pushing back against me, you're being nice and supporting black people. You're going, all black people think like this. Andy doesn't think like this. I will support the black people. But the big problem here is a lot of black people don't think like this either. And the reason for that is because we cannot judge black people on what they think, or what their morals are, or what their views, or whether they're good or bad, or any of that based upon their colour of their skin. It's racist. We cannot judge Louis Armstrong or King Oliver or Duke Ellington or Count Basie. We cannot judge their merits as incredible musicians through the framework of their blackness. Culturally and aesthetically, that's in their music, and I could do a whole video on that if you want, and I will explain it in detail. And I think I'll have a more accurate idea of what blackness is. That I think there is a thing you'll call blackness. I use it all the time on this channel, right? There's an aesthetic idea of what blackness is and black music. There's an aesthetic. These things are wonderful. I love. This is what I'm here for, because I love it. I love that bit of it. But I don't want to judge Louis Armstrong based upon that, because he's too much of a genius. You know the real reason why? Because there is a prejudice that is applied to black American culture, which is it's innate, it's inborn. Black people have feel, they have natural rhythm. No, they don't. I've taught drums for years. I've got more natural rhythm, more groove and funk than many of the black kids I've taught drums to. I know that sounds like a terrible thing, but it's true. Right, when someone's got groove and funk, it's a attribute that they have. It's really valued in American culture. My God, there's a reason for that, and it's championed. And this is where we go to find it. Yeah, without a doubt, that's the case. You know, it's like Clyde Stubblefield. We bow down to the man. We do. Bernard Purdie. These are the gods. These are the gods of funk. I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy to bloody adjust their drum stool. That's how I feel. I love these musicians. I cannot be forced to judge them on their skin colour. They're beyond that. This is my moral position. If you want to push back against it and say something, you go, oh yeah, I will change it. But nobody has yet. Maybe it's because I'm an old man and I'm just sticking them and I don't really listen to what anyone says. But at least I can say that. Right? So this hierarchy at the top, and this is the real bad bit, at the top is white people, the white supremacy, the capitalist white supremacy that they do all. And if there is a certain lack of privilege which gives people, the black people at the bottom, and so there's this thing called intersectionality, which is even more ridiculous, because basically what it states is that it's like points of underprivileged. So you're black, so you get, say, a point. But then you're a woman, you get a point. But then you're a lesbian, so you get a point. But you're not really a lesbian. You were a man, and you now identify as a woman, but you still are attracted to women because you were a man originally, but you're not anymore because you're trans. So now you get extra points. You become right at the bottom. And these points have got nothing to do with actual privilege. You may be rich. You may be, privileged. You may have brought up in a family where they just dropped you with a sort of allowance and you don't have to work. You haven't got to get a house. You know what I mean? You're protected by all sorts of things around you because of your wealth. But you're still the bottom of the pile. Right? Now, that's ridiculous. But the big problem is that if you have this Marxist view where you dislike capitalism, which has almost become a standard thing here in the West, my kids will say it. They're being taught it at school. Capitalism's bad, right? Well, I'm not going to counter that, which I could. I'm going to say this. If capitalism is bad and those people are at work trying to siphon off the wealth to go to themselves and not to where it should go, then identity politics is the best thing that could have ever come along. Because instead of being spotted taking the money for yourself, you could siphon that money off and send it to people that belong to those identity groups which you've assigned as being underprivileged, but they're not actually underprivileged. We can use that to virtue signal and take the taxes of the great unwashed and not give it back to them in supporting the people who are poor. We will support those people, say, that are at the elite colleges who happen to be black, or people in politics that happen to be black. And because we're sending it back to our own, the rich people in these identity politics, it will actually come back to us white privileged people as well. And we'll be able to maintain all that, right? That is what we are in at the moment. And that is the great political tussle that's going on at the moment. And one of the things you'll notice is that the people who are against that, they're sometimes being accused of being right-wing, but they are all still billionaire elites. We are watching one billionaire elite arguing with another one whilst we sit at the bottom of the pile like this, just looking at them. That's the truth of what is happening at the moment. If anybody comes from the great unwashed, any working class person stands up and says anything, they'll put them in prison. And that's what's happened in the UK here. Hasn't happened so much in America, but that's what's happened in the UK here, right? Because they have a crass way of talking and they say what they say. They're not tuned into all this identity politics, so they might say something that is politically incorrect. And if you weaponize that, you can send these people to prison. This is what we're at the moment. Now, why does this matter for music? Because this video says it's going to be about identity politics and music, right? If we go back to the jazz singer can be seen as the first time the idea of jazz really reaches mainstream culture. And it doesn't just reach it, it changes it. The Jazz Singer as a film comes along and it creates all these different forms, or actually reimagines and reestablishes these forms. In that, it brings all these ideas to the core. So say if you look at the musical, okay? The musical's got a certain history. Jewish culture has played a huge part in the development of the musical. The musical is actually related to a tradition that does go back to the sort of Jewish cantor, which this film deals with directly. Don't you think it's weird that the very first musical is actually dealing in essence with one of the building blocks of the Hollywood musical? The other one, of course, is jazz. The other one is like dance routines, and those dance routines go back to what all of this is pulled together. And don't you think it's interesting that the biggest thing the Jazz Singer does is actually integrate all these forms together? It integrates jazz, tap dance, minstrelsy, Jewish culture, vaudeville, songwriting, film, acting, storytelling. Is all pulled together. Now, is this the first art form that really does this? Or it's not the first to do it, but it's the first to do it on this level. And it's the first to, Hollywood cinema is completely different. None of us can watch a silent film unless you're a specialist. Right? These films are huge. But once the Jazz Singer came in, it was game over for silent film. What's happening now culturally is that's happening across the board. It's game over for cinema. It's game over for like music. It's game over for all of these things. We're going through a cultural shift. And we can get an idea about going back to the Jazz Singer and going, why was this so powerful? You know, it's because he sung. He didn't just speak, he sung. You know, when he does speak, the very first line, I can't quite remember, but it's a statement of intent. He sort of comes on and goes, you're not going to believe this. I can't remember exactly. I'm sure you'll put it in the comments. Sorry about my aged brain not being able to pull that. Normally I would have been able to pull that out of thin air. But it's a statement that in an accent. I'm trying to get you to understand that if you lived in France or Germany or wherever and the other thing is, it's interesting. There's so much in this. I wish I could just do the video and talk about the film without all the identity types coming along and telling me I can't talk about this and I can't talk about that and I need to address this. Well, I have addressed it. This is a long video. Cinema, up until that point, was a universal form. You could watch a film all over the world. It was a silent film. As soon as the words are put in, it's like the Tower of Babel almost. Suddenly, it's American cinema. And that's going to be the great cultural form. That's going to take over the world. Oh, this is so too big. As I'm talking about, I'm realizing the ramifications of this is so huge. Jazz, again, original Dixieland Jazz Band, and what they do on that record, it's not a vocal record, it's an instrumental record, it's a novelty record, but it just blew people away. It sold millions of copies. Jazz, again, was an international form. You know, when the Hot Club of France decided to, honour American jazz and become the first great non-American jazz group to change the history of jazz, They could do this because it's instrumental music. You know, Django Reinhardt, Stefan Grappelli, when they listen to Duke Ellington and Fletcher Henderson, or who they listen to, or Eddie Lang and those guys, Joe Venuti. When they're listening to those people, they could get it because there's no language there. This is the point where this is the point where the English language becomes the language of mainstream cultural stuff. Now, I'm sure you're going to go, oh yeah, Andy, you always ignore what's going on, you know, in Japan or China or Australia. You only talk about Western music forms. I'll tell you why I do that is because someone showed me a website once, and it was like, it had all the countries in the world, and you could click on it and find out what the famous band is in that country. It was literally like, I clicked on America, and it was like the Beatles, AC/DC, Led Zeppelin, I think it was. And then I clicked on France, and it was like the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, AC/DC. And then I clicked on Afghanistan, and the top band was AC/DC. And I thought, bloody hell. That is the testament, is that there's a few international artists that have travelled around the whole world, but our Western culture, and it's America, it's American capitalism. As America has impinged its capitalism, you know, so there's in McDonald's, when you arrive in bloody Pakistan or somewhere. I watched a video the other day, this guy arrives, first thing is to go to McDonald's, Pakistan McDonald's. That infliction of our Western capital piece across the whole world has been, the ambassador of that was jazz, it was cinema. You know, the people that the Taliban, when they were holding hostages there in the back of the room, and they sat there entertaining themselves, you know, playing cards, they're watching Sylvester Stallone films, aren't they? It's like, this is so important to understand this and what it's based upon and where it comes from, and to understand that in America, black people do play a huge part in it. And it's down to the history of slavery. It's down to the history of minstrelsy. It's down to the way the segregation went. It's down to the shifting status that black people had in America. It's been like this. It has just been terrible, and then civil rights solved it. There's been ups and downs, you know. Racism is now on it's coming up again. And the reason is directly because of identity politics. The establishment of identity politics, which I believe is fundamentally racist, is creating racism. And it's going both ways at the moment. What we cannot fetishize, which I think is what's happening. We can't look back with the 1960s and go, oh, wasn't that wonderful? That's Martin Luther King. That's an example of a great person because they were fighting against racism. And fetishize that which is what's happened with intersectionality, that we think that the identity groups inherently are good because it will end up that white people are inherently bad. And you'll go, well, you would say that, Andy, and I would, because I don't want to become the next Jews of the world or the next black slaves of the world. I don't want it to happen to me. I don't want to be part of the white supremacy that has to be wiped out. Because those types that really drive identity politics, not the middle class that just virtue signaling because they don't understand what it is. I'm on about the real revolutionary types. They want a communist state. Essentially, you know, Black Lives Matter were Marxist, and they were avowed Marxists, and they want to bring that in. They want a revolution. And if they have a revolution, to have a revolution, you have to point at some group, whether it's the bourgeoisie, you know, whether it's the Russian czars, or whether it's the Jews, or whatever it is. You have to point at somebody and you have to say, they're the ones, right? And believe me, our music that we had in the 20th century, the music that we celebrate on this channel, whether it be the lyric-based music, the meaning-based music of the greats like Bob Dylan, like all the stuff that I'm not so much of a fan of, you know, but like Joni Mitchell, who I love, you know, all that end of the stuff that the critics like, but also What's embodied in the Mahavishnu Orchestra? What's embodied in Weather Report? What's Weather Report about? It's about fusion. It's about integrating all these things. It's about saying we're all one set of people. Weather Report is a great procession. It's a great celebration. It's a festival of community. It's all of us being together. That's what we should be championing now. We should be putting our differences aside. And what are those differences? These arbitrary identity groups, right? And we should be able to look back and look at the jazz singer and go, that blackface that I find offensive is a symbol of the tussle that went on in American culture that ended up with something positive. Right? The blackface itself, of course, is a stereotypical idealization of racist idealization that was rooted in the argument that the white Western American and British and whatever capitalist powers used to justify enslaving black people. That's what that blackface is. It's a cartoon that dehumanizes people. But within that, when these black genius people were at the bottom of the pile, they were wily enough to go, yeah, but I could actually squeeze into this and we could open this out. And that is also represented there. I know it's there. So when the civil rights movement happened in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, there was an erasure of what black artists had achieved within minstrelsy. The first millionaire black entertainers were blackface entertainers in the end of the 19th century, way before. And this is a challenge to the segregation that was then about to emerge in 1895 in America. On top of this, the first black artists to write musicals to actually change the culture in America, to actually affect it, weren't jazz musicians, they were blackface minstrel performers. When minstrelsy was completely eradicated, there was many black entertainers, right, that saw blackface in... I used to work in a college, and one of the lecturers that I used to work with, he was an expert on masks, and he looked at the Greek tradition of masks that goes back a long way, and it inspired me to do a musical show where my students would put on masks. I just bought a bunch of, like, you know, those just white plain masks, and they all put on that. And as soon as they did that, they were no longer there, and it allowed them to perform because it wasn't them. And I remember chatting to this guy about this. This is probably the profound bit of this video, and the bit I've never said before, because I've gone over stuff I've said before. This is the profound bit. He said that when you get the mask and you look into the mask, obviously you're looking into the mask like this. And when you look at it, you can see the face, but it's in reverse. It's the opposite. But when you look at it, he says there's an optical illusion that happens, that at some point the mask turns around and looks at you. And he says that it's at that moment when the mask looks at you. You know those two masks that we see that represent, you know, entertainment that we inherit from the Greeks. You know, the smiley face and the grumpy face. They represent the great dialectic. They represent what everything on this channel always ends up that I talk about when I talk about creativity. It's embodied in those masks. And what we have in American culture, which is in the most important art form, is the blackface. And the realization I've had getting to this point, which is a bloody long video, is that the blackface represents all the horribleness, all the racism, all the stereotyping, all the evil. But black people took it and they turned it around. They looked into it themselves. And those black artists that performed in blackface, when they put that on, as they said, you could go back and read the interviews with them, it transformed them into somebody else. There is what I don't believe this because I don't believe anyone could possibly be as black as a blackface, as we imagine a blackface. But I've read interviews with old minstrel entertainers who said that their skin colour was actually darker than the stuff they put on. Right? We have lost the nuance. Identity politics has erased in a sort of totalitarian. You know, when you look at sort of Soviet art or you look at Chinese art, you know, one of these it's the same. It's the same as we have it in community art here now. Community art is all about, it's about black rights or trans rights and all this. And when you look at that art, there's no power to it whatsoever. It means nothing. There's no grit about it at all. Our tax money goes spent on this all the time. Right, that's how they get the funding. That is one of the ways that I say this wealth is redistributed. Upper middle class artsy fartsy types making art about being trans or black, and they're getting money to do this, and then make art that has no bite and no challenge to what has now become the dogmatic ideology of the establishment, of the academy. This is where we're at. You cannot challenge it. Right, I know I'm stepping carefully. I'm a natural contrarian. This is what this channel's about, as I said at the top of this video. Right, but you can't. I'm scared stiff saying all this. I mean, a few more years in this country, maybe even a few more months, I'll be able to cart it off. I'm sure I've said something that will mean I shall be imprisoned or my YouTube taken down. Here I am stating that I hate racism, explaining how racism happens, giving them my opinion of how I think, and it's a logical explanation, and yet I feel terrified that these bloody self-appointed moral, Pharisee are going to stand over me and go, no, you said the wrong thing. Cancel him. Get rid of him. Put him in the bin. That's what they always say, the lefties. They should go in the bin. That person should go in the bin. Fancy saying, what's this bin? Is it like the gas chamber? Is that what it is? I hate the phrase. I hate it. We have lost the nuance. Right? We have lost actually where prejudice lies. We have lost the ability to go back to that film that is nearly 100 years old, The Jazz Singer, and watch it and look at the story of it and actually understand the story that is going on in that film. We have lost the ability to actually look at the art and go beyond just the surface. Don't judge a book by its cover. Don't judge a book by its cover is the statement that explains why racism is wrong. And yet we now judge the book by its cover. What's the story of The Jazz Singer about? And what does it mean? Now, we're up at 1 hour 15 on this video. I will come back, I think, another time and go into detail of all the influences on The Jazz Singer, how they all come together, but most importantly, why they were all brought together and what it means. But what would be much better would be to let the art do it and for you to go and check it out, and I know it's an old film and it's all scratchy, but, watch it and then think, why was this so important? What is it about? What is the message? What was Al Jolson's message here? What was his message in his music? It's and to see what was actually in people's minds at that time, and to see that good moral views they had, which hopefully survived, and the bad moral views and how they were eradicated. So we can eradicate, which is what will definitely be the bad moral views that are apparent right now in our culture. And I'm going to state it now. They are equally spread amongst the left and the right. That's what I believe. The Jazz Singer is the greatest creative creation of the 20th century. That is what I've said on this video. That's what I believe. I've tried to explain it, and I hope that at the end of this video, you can see that it's still 100 years later able to provoke a discussion that goes to the heart of the ideology of our current culture. And what I've done on here is question that. And I hope I've done a reasonable job of doing that. And I hope that anybody who goes, yeah, but you've got your own opinion, Andy, and you're tending to go towards the right wing, which I don't think is the case whatsoever, and I'm willing to have that discussion. I'm championing creativity, which means I'm a champion freedom of expression and freedom of speech. And it's those aspects I don't like. I'm not keen at all on the religious right that's emerging at the moment. I think that's a bad thing. I think one of the great genius aspects of American culture was to not have a religious government, because they don't work. You've got one in Israel, you've got one in Iran, they don't work. And a communist is exactly the same. We have a non-secular government which allows people to be free and worship what they want, do what they want, believe what they want. Everyone should be allowed to believe what they want and follow what they want. But they cannot have any legislation against anybody who pushes it back against their beliefs. This idea of the Islamophobia laws here in the UK, and the idea that if you were to burn a Quran, that you will get arrested and go to prison. I think that's absolutely wrong. I understand when people go, yeah, but it offends people. If you don't want to see someone burning a Quran. I know it does offend people, but it's a step too far, because an artist should be able to create a piece of work that is powerful and has potency, which means they may have to be able to express themselves in a way which seems really offensive. We have to have that. You have to have it. It's a part. It's even though it doesn't seem it, it's what makes us civilized. Nobody understands how we don't value what creative people do anymore. And that is the product of Western capitalism. Everything's judged by money and how much money it makes. And if we want to live in an advanced, decent, advanced culture, we have to realise that all this money does and all the wealth does, and we need to fight wealth inequality, but it enables people to get to a point where they can be creative. And we have to have the discussion of what creativity is, because creativity is about is giving and receiving, and we are about to move into a culture where the Mount Olympus of artists up here, the Al Jolsons here, and then the receivers down here, that is now breaking down. That's fundamentally what's breaking down. Creativity is about to be democratized, and that's going to go back to a way that people were creative before industrialization. So we're in a post-industrialization era at the moment. And you might say, yeah, fair enough, Andy, that's a detail. No, it's not a detail, because the cultural creative drive, as that changes, we are going to get a differential creative spread amongst people. It's happening at the moment. It's happening right now. The problem is that we don't judge TikTok videos as art, in the same way they didn't judge jazz as art. This is what I'm here talking about. This is what I'm here talking about. This is what this channel's about. This is why I'm here. I'm not just here to just talk about, what's the best Genesis album. I'm not one of those YouTubers. I love them and I love what they do, but that's not what I'm doing here at all. There's something else going on, and I'm trying to get to this, and I really believe it's important, or I wouldn't be doing it. And this is why I do these videos. I'm gonna, once I finish here, I'm gonna have a cup of coffee, a couple of biscuits, and then I'm gonna do a good ranty "I hate so and so" video. They're like fun. That's like art. That's like art to me. It's comedy, right? The identity lot. They can't laugh at anything. They can't find. There's no nuance in them at all. There's no nuance in it, you lefty bloody identitarians. Can't take a bloody joke, can you? No, they bloody can't. That's why there's no... left-wing comedians were the bread and butter of comedians in the 1980s. They were bloody brilliant, because they were like anarchists. They were pushing against the thing, but now they're the worst. Now, the only funny ones are the ones who bloody right wing. Except for Stuart Lee. I will never doubt Stuart. Stuart Lee, I want to interview on my channel. I'm going to have Stuart Lee on. He's my favourite comedian. He's massively left wing. I would love to, because I really believe, if I love him so much, that there's got to be, underneath it all, some, we must agree somewhere, because I love him so much. And what do we agree on? Because if we can get down to that, we might just have a way of moving forward to a more harmonious bloody world, which I think is what everybody wants. It's what all us normal people want, isn't it? The billionaires don't, though, do they? They just want to make sure they can stay being billionaires. And why is that? Because they're, that's another thing, isn't it? This is going on for this is an hour and a half long. There's been no editing on this. I have gone for this. This is how bad, this is how much I can't even get to the back end of this one. This video is about it. This is the one that's about it. This video is. This is it. Right here. You've seen it now. And all I've done is walk up to the door of this and say, look, there's this big door. I haven't even walked in. I haven't even walked in. I'll have to stop here. I've got a new haircut and I've got a bad hand. That's the news for Andy in the actual real world. It's Friday. I'm looking forward to the weekend. It's a sort of cloudy but nice day. I'm sat in my studio. I do love it here. It's quiet and peaceful. I can have a think. I'm surrounded by all my lovely stuff. I hope you're all right. And even those who are on the identitarian left, I'm going to end with this. I do love you very much. Yeah, I know you come from a good place. And I know most of where you're coming from is, we agree. And if you do have a gut reaction to have a go, please also put in if there's any area you agree, not to just make me feel happy, but so we can build on something. Because I tell you something, it's great to see people ranting about this, and there's so many people make like the Ben Shapiros, of the world that are millionaires out of being able to monetize this argument. But when you do come across someone with a different political view, and when you sit down in real life, you often straight away go towards the things where you are on the same wavelength straight away. When you're online, you don't. That could be another video as well. I would love to just be able to talk about cultural stuff now. Yeah, I'm not quite there. I've got to do a few prog videos still anyway, even though it's irrelevant now, but that's another thing. If we move to a point where you go, I don't agree with Andy on everything, but fundamentally his dislike of racism is the same as mine. So we're coming from the same place. And so what's the difference? I'll tell you what the difference is that it's the difference between ignoring identity or using identity to create equity. That's the discussion there. That's the discussion. I haven't got the ideological position to go, I don't think there should be some level of equity, right? But I believe it should be on... I have this weird thing that I think certain things need to be kept on an individual level. If, say, a college was to say, when we interview, we've got to make sure that there's that percentage of black people, that's the percentage of white people, and we'll put that black person on because they're black, and we'll ignore the white people that might be better students, just because they're white. That's disgusting, right? That's DEI. That's what is dying at the moment. But if some individual interviewer's there and they're looking at two candidates, they can only pick one, and they can see one guy's a white guy from a privileged background and can probably get a place in another place, but there's this black kid sat in front of them, and they think, yeah, they need a bloody help. I think morally they should go for the black kid. And that's a contradiction, isn't it? You understand? It's a contradiction. All this from the jazz singer. All of this from me thinking about, let's do the jazz singer. That's a powerful piece of art. It's still alive. It's still able to provoke thought. This is an hour and a half long. An hour and a half long is of just me talking. Bloody hell, what an ego. You all right then? Shall we finish there then? I've got OCD, you see, and I'm on 1 minute 28 seconds, and I like it to be sort of on the hour or the hour and a half in this case. This is why I'm now just treading water at the end. For those people that just want to get the last bit of juice from this video, they're all the best people. You lot are all the best people. Even if you are on the ideological left. I do love you, you know. I do. I don't want to have a row with you. I really don't. So come to me with friendship, and I hope it'll be all right. And don't have a go at me. I promise you, I'm not a Nazi. I'm not a Nazi. You can tell a Nazi nowadays. Why? Well, they don't like judging people on their colour, right? They don't like people going on about white supremacy and Jewish supremacies. These are all the signs of a Nazi now. They like freedom of speech. You know, they don't like people getting put in prison because they had an opinion. They'll support people's opinions even though when they're not there. All these things, and it's right wing. You're right wing, Andy, saying all this stuff. You're a Nazi. This is what Hitler was putting out there. Bloody hell, what is going on at the moment in our world? Bonkers, you know, bonkers, said the old man. Maybe I'm just old and I don't get it. You're old, Andy. Your time's passed. All these young people are going to come up with all their identity politics view of the world, and that become the norm. And everyone will work like that, you know. And it's like, I mean, my kids, they don't think you should use the word black now in any context whatsoever. You know, if there was a cup on the table, there was a white cup and a black cup, and I could say, can you send me that big cup? Which cup do you want? If I said that to my children and they wanted the black one, they go, well, the one on the right. Which one's that? Describe it. Oh, you know, the one that's on the right, the one that's next to the other cup. It's like, this is what we live in. It's now 30, we're done. See ya. Bye-bye.